official because like just to give people breaks between meetings. So be back to back.
All right, we should get started then. So does anyone want to share screen?
I can. Just give me a second.
Right. Yeah, go ahead. If not, I can. We don't have any agenda. John, maybe it's worthwhile for you to quickly give an update to the community about the ambient XDS evolution, because I believe there are some updates on the doc, just to highlight folks. And then maybe we should have a KubeCon update for folks who went to KubeCon. And then Nathan, I know you have a DNS for Ambient. Are you ready to discuss that today?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. I'll put that on the agenda too. So with that, John, you want to give us a quick update on some of the updates on the Ambient XDS evolution?
Yeah, Drew, let me put it on the agenda and then.
I just did.
Thanks.
Do you want me to share that, John?
That would be nice, yeah. I think you're probably sharing one tab, but
no, for some reason it's not allowing me to switch the tab that's sharing here. Let me represent this. Okay.
Yeah, so we talked about this a while back. Since then, we've made a few changes. One is we have this new API principles section, which is, instead of proto buffs, kind of talking about what problems we're trying to solve, why we're doing things the way we're doing them, and just kind of general explanation in English of the API. So I don't know if it probably doesn't make sense to go over them all here. The other change in particular is since in the actual proto, since we last talked, is some more tuning of how we actually represent a resource name and services. So before we were kind of representing things as IP addresses, everything was an IP. But we realized that can be kind of problematic because a lot of things have multiple IPs, right? And so in XDS, you can actually have aliases for names. So we decided we would actually make the primary key something stable. I think it's UID is what we decided of the resource. But we still want to be able to look up by IP address for on-demand things and whatnot. So each resource will also have an alias that's its IP address, which, yeah, we'll look up on demand. So that applies for both services and workloads. And then the other thing was we kind of scoped out service a bit more. So there's kind of two distinct types of services, one that selects workloads and one that we call opaque service, which is something that's just reachable by its VIP or DNS name. This is useful if we want to do something like, say, the waypoint's at example.com, for example. Maybe just reach it that way. I think that's the major changes. There's a lot of like subtle changes as well, but those are kind of the larger changes. I'm happy to go into more details about anything anyone has questions about, or if not, folks can review the doc more offline.
How is this? Is that UID or UID defined, or another random number, or based on Kubernetes resource ID, or?
I mean, in theory, it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's stable. We will use the resource UID though. So
there is a UID in the Kubernetes resource.
Yeah.
Is that unique across different cluster also?
If you look at we went through this quite a bit. If you go through the Kubernetes docs, it says it's globally unique. Technically, it's just a random number, but the odds of a collision are astronomically small, and Kubernetes does assume that it's globally unique across clusters. So.
Okay. Mitch?
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand what functionality this design would unlock for Ambient. We're we've already got a branch cut for alpha, I think, or we're in the process of branch cut for alpha on Ambient. And these changes are not yet in place. So what would change from a user perspective once we implement this design?
Yeah, it's at the top in gaps to fill. If we want to scroll up there. Justin, maybe you could scroll up. There's basically like 10 different things that can't be implemented with the current API. So we will fill those gaps.
Okay, I missed that section. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, so is there any plan, since Mitch was asking, I assume the plan is having this in master, but not backward to, is it 118, right? That's just branched and everything?
I think we should probably tackle that problem in general, not for this design. And my opinion is that we should not invest much, if any, effort into 1.18 once it ships.
Yeah, once it's shipped, but now it's not shipped yet, right?
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, there's, I mean, it's basically shipped at this point, right? Like it's alpha. If people want,
Okay.
you know, cutting edge things, they can use master branch. I don't think we should spend too much engineering effort maintaining a branch for Ambient right now. And I think there was already some consensus that we were not going to worry about backwards incompatible changes on the master branch either. So that may address some of your concerns here, Mitch, if they were about compatibility.
So John, back to UID, do we have consensus, or is it cast in stone, or is it decided, or what's how much?
No, I don't. I'm not that strong about UID. It just needs to be something that's stable and unique. So
definitely more unique than IP addresses for sure, but there are other options that are unique. I mean, again, resources also have a namespace, cluster name, and you know, pod ID or resource ID, which is kind of what Kubernetes uses in URLs. And I would say they're even more stable because you know.
Yeah, I mean that's probably fine. What the name is actually doesn't matter at all, right? It could just be anything really.
Yeah. I don't mind if we also can refer to them by the UID, because UID is good. It's in Kubernetes. We can track it. But I would like the primary identifier to be a fully qualified name or something that it's definitely not SPIFFY ID.
Yeah, no, actually that's probably good, because I think UID may be hard because we may represent one workload. Like, what if it was a workload entry, but now it's a pod or something? Then has a different UID, but maybe those are supposed to be the same thing. Or service is more likely, like we have multiple clusters. So I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about services. Like, we're really planning on representing services with UIDs as well, because that would mean that every cluster would get a unique service.
Oh, actually, now that I look at it, we already removed UID from service. So my info about it's harder for workload. Like, what is the unique name? Like in service, it's easy. It's namespace plus host name. But in workload, it's like name doesn't matter. It's not globally unique, and it's not even unique within a cluster because there's multiple types. So I'm open to a UID if someone comes up with something that's stable and unique. UID was what we have, but we can certainly change it. But yeah, service, I agree. Service shouldn't be UID, and I forgot we had already changed that.
Besides, how would a user know the UID in order to query for it? It's kind of.
Well, that's the whole point, is that users don't query for it. They query by the secondary keys, the IP addresses.
So then what the UID is doing? Just that you have also some conceptual ideas?
Because IP is not stable, right? Like, we have dual stack, we have multiple IPs. So which one do we make the primary key? We sort them and pick the first one. What if we it's just hard to make it a stable identifier, right?
What I mean is, as a user, you intercept a packet, you need to qualify it somehow in the URL. I mean, the problem doesn't go away if you have UID.
Right. That's why you look up by the secondary key.
Okay, I'm confused. Anyway, we can take it off.
Yeah. So in XJS, there's the resource name, but you can have aliases, and so the aliases will be all the IP addresses that represent the workload or the service, which there will likely be many in most cases. and the user or ztunnel will look up by only those IP addresses.
So if nobody is looking by UUIDs, then you can keep it. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for this design? If not, we can move to the next topic.
Yeah, the only reason I'll just additionally call out that we've been working on this, the implementation's in flight, so it is a little time pressure to, please review this if you haven't looked at it closely, even offline.
Yeah, that's a great mention. Thank you, Kevin. All right, should we move to the next topic? KubeCon, right? We have a couple of people join KubeCon. Curious to hear, what everybody think about the sentiment around ambient in the conference. Does anyone want to share? Keith, are you here? Can we call you first?
Oh yeah, sure. So overall, sentiment seemed pretty positive towards Istio. So Microsoft announced our Istio offering, and we had several customers who are very interested and excited about it. The only kind of somewhat negative things I encountered was there are folks who weren't super happy about the speed, like how frequently they have to upgrade. So Istio's release cadence is about once a quarter. And so they, because of how large their fleet was, they said that they have to start doing Istio upgrades every 15 days. Because by the time they finish upgrading their entire fleet, there's a new release, and they've got to be on N-2 minor version as policy because of support. So they are constantly doing that. So that was one piece of user feedback. The other one were just questions. We had that panel, and there are a couple of people asking if Istio will be able to make cert rotation easier, and questions about ambient, things like that. And then I'll let Mitch talk about the folks that we ran across about tags and revisions. But yeah, that's kind of that was my experience. Justin?
Yeah, I was curious on the upgrade frequencies. Did they? I mean, this is obviously a topic we've discussed in the past, but was there a preference that you heard was like the Kubernetes 3 times a year? Was that considered acceptable, or did you get a sense of like kind of what they were looking for?
They said I asked that, like, what time frame. They said forever.
Right.
Classic user. But yeah, I threw out a couple of numbers, like a year, 2 years, as far as support. And that was fine with them. But I mean, it's definitely a problem that makes sense, right? As your fleet scales, you have to coordinate those upgrades across them. It does take a considerable amount of time. And so I think it was less the releases. They didn't seem like they didn't say they needed like the newest features. It was more they have to be on N-2 because they're a bank and because they've got those policies to require a certain level of support, which was N-2. So I think that for them, as long as they can they get support and back patching and stuff like that, they'd be fine.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Keith, and congratulations on Microsoft's announcement. I saw like you were talking about Istio support at your booth. It was super well attended.
Well, thank you. I'm happy. It's been going on for a while, but I'm happy I can talk about it publicly, which is nice.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Mitch, do you want to go next since Keith called you?
Yeah, sure. So Keith and I both had a little bit of an agenda as we were at the booth last week. You may remember that a month, maybe a month and a half ago, we had some extended conversations about an upgrade API, particularly about codifying what we've already got in the Istio cuddle tag command to its own CRD. And our decision was that we needed more feedback from users on the validity of the API, whether it was the right shape and the way that they wanted to upgrade, particularly their ambient clusters, but also to some smaller degree, their existing sidecar clusters. We did hear from 2 particular users who volunteered that they very much need an upgrade API. Each of these users are in production with Istio for several years now, and they manage their clusters through GitOps. So getting command line access to Kubernetes is just not an option for these users. They are currently using not tags, but revisions, which is a very similar API. Tags are essentially just an alias to revisions, but talked about how difficult it is to understand a pull request, where a revision is changing, because a revision is codified as a mutating webhook config. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 lines of YAML that really only expresses a very small concept, which is that this revision of Istio exists and it has a revision name. So they expressed an interest in seeing a way to upgrade their clusters that did not involve using any Istio cuddle tooling and that did not involve having large mutating webhook configs. Now, of course, they didn't specifically ask for a tag CRD. They weren't proposing solutions, but there was some strong signal that we need to improve the user experience here. I see a couple hands.
Mitch, on the same topic, I also talked with a bit with people work on Argo rollouts and a few others which are kind of specialized in this kind of how to upgrade arbitrary things. And I was planning to kind of revive my previous proposal to put a gateway in front of Istio-D and start using standard CI/CD and tooling, like, for example, allow Argo CD to be used to upgrade Istio, and using the standard mechanism, because Istio-D is just a service like any other service in the cluster. There's nothing special about Istio-D, or nothing should be special about Istio-D. So I was going to, I've been spending some quality time with Argo and some other tools, and I was trying to do a prototype with Istio-D as well. I would look forward to opinions and feedback on if this is acceptable path.
Yeah, on the XDS side, we've had demos a few times in the past of doing something like an Argo rollout or a Flagger rollout, moving progressively our XDS traffic from one version of Istio-D to the next. I think there's a lot of value there. That doesn't solve the problem of waypoint scheduling, but it does. It's part of the upgrade process. It's relevant to the conversation.
Yeah. Waypoint is more or less as a job of Istio-D. I mean, it's a separate issue, and because we are a controller, but injection definitely can be covered by a gateway, and you can get a proper DNS name with certificate. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities to integrate and do additional apply additional policies. John.
Oh, sorry, you finished that. It was kind of a separate topic on this.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm done.
Yeah, I don't understand, Mitch. What is upgrade API? Like, isn't you install Istio with Helm? Helm is how everything's installed. I'm not sure I understand what's missing.
That's a great question. So an upgrade API would be a way to programmatically indicate that a certain set of proxies need to move from one version to another. Those could be sidecar proxies, they could be waypoint proxies, but in our, what we've called in the past, canary or revision and tag based upgrade process, you have an intermittent state where some of your proxies are of one version and some are of another version. Users need a way to signal when proxies should move from one version to the next. Currently, we do that with tags using mutating webhook configs.
I still don't understand why. I mean, it's a namespace label, right? I mean, if you want to change, you said they weren't even using tags, right? They're just using revisions. To change it, you just label the namespace, right?
Yes. So for most of our users, the number of namespaces that they have, or if they're using workload labels, it's not really possible to change the labels across all of the namespaces. These upgrades are things that should be carried out by the cluster administrator, who often doesn't even have the right access to individual application namespaces.
If they're doing that, then they should use tags.
Exactly.
Okay, and
They
then
should
if
be,
you use
they would
tags,
like to
then
use tags, but the current API does not work for them. It
I
requires
don't
use
understand
of
why
a,
not. Like, why don't we just add a Helm chart and then that's it? It's just a one parameter Helm chart. Like, I get they don't want to use Istio Cuddle, but Helm is kind of standard. I really don't want to invent a 5th install upgrade API.
so you're suggesting a Helm chart that has just two parameters that would be essentially similar to the tag command, and on the back end would generate a mutating webhook config?
Yeah, yeah.
Let me think about that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'd imagine it could work with Helm. Maybe we should, educate the user how to do that once we think out.
You'd be creating a mutating webhook configuration with, so where would the CA for the mutating webhook configuration come from? Like the cert information.
I think it's from IstioD, if IstioD is your CA.
So, yeah, so that's why IstioCTLX tag works, right? You're creating a mutating webhook configuration and it's able to talk to IstioD and get the cert. With Helm, how would you go about doing that?
Oh, that's a good point. I remember Sam maybe mentioned in the past that we don't have such equivalent support for Istio Cuddle tag for
Do-
Helm.
Do you really need it? I mean, when you install Istio normally, you get a webhook, and then Istio sticks the cert. Why not just do the same for tag, right?
Yeah, and if you have a gateway in front of Istio, that becomes very simple because you don't even touch ever the hook. Webhook is always pointing to Istio, the Istio system, which is a gateway, and then you have an HTTP route that is pointing it wherever you want. You don't have to do any. You don't touch ever again the webhook. Basically, you have, if you stick an ACME certificate, you don't even have to patch it.
John, is
Yeah.
there a reason of simplicity or complexity that would cause you to prefer a Helm chart with a values file over a CRD?
Yes, I think that operators are usually terrible. I really, really, really don't want to invent a 5th way to manage installation of Istio. Right? Helm is one. Like, there's no reason. I mean, you don't use like, how do you upgrade Argo? Right? You use the Helm chart.
Yeah. John, I mean, I completely agree with you that inventing a 3rd, 4th, 5th way to install and upgrade it's probably not ideal. But I would first verify if we can make it work with Argo and with a normal proper CD using HTTP routes and traffic shifting and the standard ways that all the other applications are upgraded, and then mess with Helm charts, yes, if necessary. But I completely agree that your solution is pretty good. But I would very much prefer to adopt standard solutions instead of Istio. If it's anything Istio that only Istio is doing it, it's probably fishy.
So to be fair, the difference I think between typical upgrade paths is that with Helm, you typically have endless upgrades. Istio's Canary approach with sidecars makes that a little bit different. But yeah, if Istio can patch the mutating webhook configuration, I think the Helm chart approach can work.
Argo doesn't use in-place upgrades. They do traffic shifting using, either Istio APIs or Gamma API or Gamma API or something like that. So they're using exactly the same mechanism we are using and the same mechanism we recommend users to do for their own workloads, where they do Canary and so forth.
But Argo rollouts is a little bit different. Like you install, well, yeah, I guess it's the same. It's the same thing effectively as revisions. It's just not. Yeah, you don't need the revisions API to do it in Argo. Gotcha.
Do you have any docs or even steps to do that, Constant? Use the rollout to put the Istio gateway in front of the Istio D and use Argo rollout to roll out different versions. I think that's pretty cool too.
I'm working on testing with Argo. I had a PR earlier, but it's trivial now. I mean, you just create a gateway called Istio system, and install Istio with a revision, and then use HTTP route and standard APIs. You can do it either manually or because Argo is just automating the HTTP route, so it's automating shifting, setting weights on the HTTP route. And it also looks at Prometheus to figure out if you start having errors, then it's automatically rolling back. But other than that, it's just a standard application of Istio APIs and how we document, in the book info. How do you do the book info with revision? Because revision and versions in our own documentation are the same thing, really.
Okay.
Lynn, I also believe Sola has a lab who basically demonstrate how to use Argo CD to basically do Istio upgrade.
Yeah, but that's not for control plane. That's for workloads.
It
I
works.
think what Carsten mentioning was the control plane when you have like multiple IstioD. I think you can use the same methodology based on what Carsten is saying.
I believe it's for control plane, but I will need to double check. John, but just to confirm, are you assume that everyone is going to use Helm for Istio upgrades? This is your assumption?
No, the premise of this was that they don't want to use Istio Cuddle. So if they don't use Istio Cuddle, then they're probably using Helm, right?
Okay. Well, no, with OCRDs.
With what?
OCRDs, like something like Argo, like
Customer resource.
Yeah, but those Argo resources then point to a Helm chart, no?
Not necessarily. Why not? Why?
What else are you pointing to?
Yeah.
For example, I will have my custom CRDs, and we basically will do upgrades. Like, I'm not sure.
Like if you're installing Istio, the only ways are basically Helm or Istio Cuddle, no?
Yep.
Yeah, I guess you would use maybe like a Argo rollout customer resource or Atlantis template from
but that's abstracting over Helm, right? It's still using Helm under the hood.
Helm, yes.
Yeah. But to Carsten's point, those are standards, which is good because everybody who are familiar with Argo, they know those languages. If we do our own thing, people have to learn it.
Yeah, my preference for Argo, well, not only Argo, I mean, probably should have someone also look at the other similar tools. But the nice thing about them is that they also integrate with Prometheus and they can automate rollbacks and have a lot more power, have a dashboard because some people like UIs. So why not?
There is also potential for better integration with Argo and other GitOps providers for waypoint scheduling. Basically, the functionality would be to remove waypoint scheduling from runtime functionality of the control plane and move it into your GitOps so that you create a gateway or a gateway resource, in GitOps. GitOps then has some sort of customized script, Helm script, something along those lines that results in the scheduling of a waypoint. It's actually a much better experience for GitOps users. The reason that we didn't pursue that direction over the past year has been that it requires GitOps. It still becomes essentially non-functional without that GitOps integration, and I'm not sure that we can mandate that for all of our users.
Mitch, that's not entirely accurate. I mean, the reason we prefer the gateway class controller to automate it is because we want to preserve the option to merge gateways and deployments, create deployments that are shared, create deployments that run out of the cluster, have vendor-provided, multi-tenant gateways that take care of the implementation. So we do not want to have users believe that there is a deployment running in cluster with a particular name that they control. Gateway is under the control of the gateway controller, and that's what many of the other implementation of gateway are doing. And I agree, we need to figure out how to do it, but it's a gateway controller responsibility to figure out how to do it. Not.
I see. So, anyways, I didn't really mean to re-kick off the discussion of tag APIs, etc. Only to say that we did get some decent feedback from users in Istio in production that there's a lot of pain with the current situation, both for sidecars and, of course, looking forward for Ambient. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the CRD solution is the one that we have to pursue. But there's certainly interest on the part of our users in seeing this pain solved.
Yeah, and we appreciate you updating us on that. Yeah, thanks so much, Mitch. Let's see, did anybody raise their hand? Okay, no. Carsten, do you want to update us anything from the conference on your impression?
Yeah, besides the discussion with Argo, I was actually very impressed by how many people were using Istio and were happy. That was to me
Yeah.
because I'm mostly exposed to bugs and angry users, but happy users. It was very nice to see the other Linkerd and the other vendors and how many people had Gamma somewhere. So, and a lot of questions about Ambient. So that's, and if it's secure.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. John, do you have anything you want to share?
I don't think anything not really covered. I mean, a lot of the questions and excitement about Ambient, of course, mostly because that's what the new thing. But yeah, just what others said as well. So there's a lot of people that were just said, yeah, we use Istio for 3 years in production. It's good. Moving on to the new hype. This booth is now boring.
Oh yeah, the boring part, I think I really liked it as the last day. I think Kit was proposing that, or I don't know who put the boring word, but make Istio boring as a goal.
Yeah, I think Yuval may have said it. I don't remember. But
Is it
yeah,
in
maybe
the panel?
Niraj.
Oh, if it's the maintainer talk, I know Niraj covered some of that. Make it boring.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks, John. Eric, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, I think most of it's probably been covered. The one thing I didn't hear, and interesting that Keith heard it, was the upgrade frequency, because that's always been sort of, something that we come back to every so often, and I know there's some talk about it again. So that was interesting. I hadn't heard that there. Ambient, certainly heard a lot about Ambient. A lot of questions, when's it coming out? Starting to see some comparisons with the other projects, so that's good. I will make a comment that I thought one of the interesting presentations I went to was the one just before the panel. I think it was
Nina.
2 people from Solo,
Yeah.
talking about the minor differences that you may see with Ambient, right, versus the sidecars, and basically because we have a waypoint versus a proxy, the sidecar proxy at both the client and server side. So I thought that was interesting. I mean, if you think about it, yes, that's the way it's got to be, but to actually see it laid out and to have the demo, I thought was really good.
Awesome. Looks like I need to catch up on that talk too. Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, I guess for me, I think you guys all said it all, lots of excitement. I guess you probably also see the announcement from Cilium about Cilium mesh. So if not, worth checking out, because there's interesting enough, every single Ambient session or Istio session I go, there are audience ask about how Cilium integrates with Ambient. There are people ask about, do I need Ambient? If Cilium provides layer 7, Cilium provides everything I need. So pretty much Istio Ambient comes up in every single Cilium session I actually attended or watched. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my take is, if Cilium provides Ambient, that's wonderful. More implementation, it's validates the concept. But calling it mesh, I think we really need to figure out what a mesh means and what are the requirements for something to be called a mesh. I mean, compatibility with Gamma, some set of core features, because Linkerd is also a mesh. Everyone has a mesh, and it's confusing for users.
Yeah, totally. I think the market is super confusing. Yeah, with some of the projects claiming they are also the mesh now.
Yeah, it was interesting to me that Cilium now has Cilium Service Mesh and Cilium Mesh, which are 2 different things. But speaking of compatibility, there are a couple of conversations I had. We actually talked about this in Gamma yesterday as well. excuse me, where we discussed potentially in sometime in the future expanding Gamma from just Gateway API to being more to be able to tackle other things. So, for example, CNI compatibility. If there's ways for Ambient and Cilium to work nicely together. There's actually an issue in Istio, Istio repo about Ambient and Ambient compatibility. And like one of the options, I think Ben Leggett posted this. Like one of the options is for Cilium and Gamma and Istio to all work together to create like a common interface for service mesh in CNI, so that we can deal with some of the race conditions or like upload something to Cilium or make Cilium aware of Istio or something like that. And I think that actually has a lot of promise because while every mesh kind of works with CNIs, it's not really clear where we can hand things off. And I think users only stand to benefit if Istio and Ambient can upload things to Cilium, or if zTunnel just becomes Cilium with some parts, with some extra stuff. I think that is a reality that is pretty nice for everybody.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how this is going to evolve. I guess if you have thoughts, I did link the issue there, so feel free to chime in our GitHub too. All right, anything anybody wants to share about KubeCon before we move to Nate? If not, let's go ahead and move to Nate about the last topic, DNS for Ambient. Go ahead.
All right, thanks. This should be pretty quick. I don't think there's anything super surprising here. Can you share the doc, or should I?
Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
My sharing is broken right now, but so it takes me a second.
Okay, no worries.
There you go. Thanks.
Great, thanks. You can probably just scroll down a bit. The background section, I think, is most of us are pretty aware of. I just did it, put it in there for context. Basically, what we did in Istio. So if you scroll down to the Kubernetes requirements, so this whole doc really is just a requirements document, just to kind of capture what the behavior we want is. So if you scroll down to the bottom of the requirements, there's like a few Kubernetes requirements. Just wanted to call them out. Oops. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just with respect to Kubernetes and Kubernetes MCS, and this kind of reflects some conversations that we've had with Costin, that basically we should just respect Kubernetes and the way Kubernetes does things as much as possible. So that means cluster local will just be cluster local. So if you look up a cluster local host name, you get endpoints or services or IPs that are relative to your cluster. If you ask for the cluster set local, which is the MCS host name, then you get the VIPs for the cluster set host. So I think nothing surprising there. It's just basically behaving as Kubernetes would behave. So that's probably the only add-on from basically specific requirements we had for Istio. So if we scroll down to the end, the design ideas. As far as deployment, we've kind of settled on this thing should basically be built as a part of the zTunnel process. We had considered using Istio agent alongside it, and we decided against it for a variety of reasons. It simplifies the architecture. It also allows DNS to be driven by the data within zTunnel, like the workload service, all that stuff. And as far as building zTunnel, I think we want to accommodate platform provided DNS. So in other words, we could we want this entire feature to be a build option of zTunnel. So you can get a zTunnel without DNS or with DNS. I think by default DNS would be enabled, but you can always build zTunnel without it. So I think that's pretty much it. If feel free to peruse the doc. It's not super long. It's just a couple pages. Yeah. Any comments?
No, I think it's a great idea, and I completely agree that doing it in zTunnel is probably the best, and using the cache that John is building with all the IPs and using workload discovery services and your stuff. So that was kind of the main reason I'm no longer a fan of Istio Agent doing DNS. One thing I want to add is that I'm starting to think that exposing PTR records will be very interesting and very important, especially there is a PR from John on metadata server. I think it's good, but probably not the only way and not sufficient for all users. So we should consider adding PTR records based on the information that is already available in.
Yeah, it's actually if you scroll up back to the requirements, there's a section on DNS records. So I do have PTR in there.
Okay. And that will be important because it will allow users to find out the workload, the identity of the user without the DNS lookup, which is built in our libraries, without having to do an HTTP lookup, which is slower. And yeah, anyway. Oh, question is, when do you see, I mean, what is, when do you think we'll have it?
Yeah, I haven't started anything. I've been off doing some other things recently. I guess when do we want it besides ASAP?
Yeah, I mean, you know the reason why I think DNS securing DNS is important, because the security model is based on secure DNS, and if DNS is compromised, so forth. But I think many platforms are having secure DNS, and there are all kind of efforts to integrate with upstream DNS servers. So it may not be a blocking thing, at least for the mainstream platform that secure DNS through other means.
Okay. If no other comments, I guess that's it.
Yeah, can you give us some time to review?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just comment offline as usual.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Nate.
Thanks, Nate.
I think that's all the topic today. Unless anybody else have anything to say.
Oh,
Right,
one more question. Sorry,
yeah.
one more question on DNS. I don't know if document is clear or if we, under one controversial topic is if we are going to continue to have client-side overrides for DNS. So basically, split horizon, or each client may get a different response based on what workload it is. And I believe the proposal is to not have that and to have kind of producer-oriented. But I want to make sure people review this aspect.
It's a little tricky because Kubernetes is split horizon, right? So insofar as what cluster local returns, etc.
No, split horizon at a cluster level, not at workload level. So you cannot have a workload A get a DNS response and workload B get a different DNS response.
Oh, right, yeah.
Kubernetes, basically same semantics with Kubernetes.
Right. Yeah, I don't see why we would go beyond that unless there's a specific reason.
Istio Classic is doing this, so that it's kind of a backward incompatible changes, but that's expected.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I mean, to some degree, the Kubernetes behavior is breaking as well, right? With Ambient for cluster local versus cluster set.local. I mean,
No,
I mean,
I completely agree. That's a major problem. So it will break, it will prevent us from doing one by default. So we need to fix it. That's definitely a high priority.
okay. Well, I think that's probably something we should tackle. That would include DNS, but I think that's probably like the way we handle Kubernetes hosts and IPs. I think is probably like a separate topic for Ambient and Istio compatibility. And DNS, whatever DNS is doing would just fall out from that.
We probably ought to have some sort of a hot list of known breaking changes included in Ambient as users begin to kick the tires and plan migrations and things like that, so that they know what to expect and aren't having to tell us where it's broken.
Yeah, agreed.
So the multi-cluster service API, is that thing become a reality? Because I saw you had a master resolve to the cluster set that local, was it?
Who is that question to?
Do you, I assume you are mostly on top of the multi-cluster service API.
I mean,
No?
I haven't done anything with it since I built out some experimental functionality in Istio, like, I don't know, 2 years ago or something. But
I looked at your functionality recently, and it does cover it for Istio normal. But for Ambient, I think we'll need to make some changes. John was also refactoring a bit the way we get the discovery, the pod, and I think we need a small patch to filter it by. So we still have some remaining work, but the foundation at least is there.
So someone in the Istio community, I assume Google is interested in implementing the multi-cluster service API for Ambient. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, I think we not only in Google, but because the Gamma Gateway API have some requirements for MCS compatibility. I think we and because it breaks upgrade and install. From my point of view, it's a blocker for using Ambient on by default in the entire cluster. We cannot have it otherwise because some application will be broken. So I cannot imagine launching Ambient without this fixed.
so specifically, you're talking about the case where somebody is transitioning from raw Kubernetes to Ambient, yeah?
Yes, I have Kubernetes. I want to add Ambient. Ambient is on by default. Some application will crash or behave differently.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, there's actually two breakage scenarios to consider, right? One is migrating from raw Kubernetes to Ambient, and the other is migrating from Istio to Ambient, which is exactly the opposite problem, right?
It's the opposite problem, but it's controlled by the nature. So you Ambient ignores Istio, so Istio can continue to not break, is not affected in any way. But any other workload that is not Istio will be affected by Ambient if we do one by default.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking that we should probably have a doc to, I forget who asked it, Mitch, maybe, a doc that maybe captures, like what will break in which scenarios, and maybe those are our two scenarios, like going to Ambient from raw Kubernetes, going to Ambient from Istio, and ways to mitigate if possible, etc. Nothing should break as a requirement. Yeah, that's been a requirement for Istio since day one, probably. Right?
Not necessarily. I mean, we made conscious choices knowing that they will break stuff like the cluster local, and we cannot fix it now.
So do we have an action for that doc? I feel like that is probably something that should be done. And
Is somebody willing to own it? Yeah.
and who owns that, right?
So my personal opinion is that this doc is the same doc with the foundation Istio, because whatever we define in foundation, Ambient should support it, and we should definitely need to have some doc about what is the features in the foundation. So I would rather share the work between the two streams. Kit, what do you think?
I mean, I don't see why we couldn't continue with this proposal as we try to figure out what's in foundation versus stable versus anything else. I mean, I feel like the two are pretty much orthogonal. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something.
No,
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about this document anymore. I think we're talking about the broader problem of like, hey, there might be some breaking changes for people either migrating from raw Kubernetes or from Istio, and how to capture that and etc.
Gotcha. Yeah. So yeah, there like I think you said it earlier, Nathan. Like the Istio kind of current state of things is that we try not to make breaking changes. The foundation mode was a way to get around that. If we're okay with breaking changes, then at that point, I think we just start yanking things from stable and beta if we don't feel like they're future forward. It's hard to say. When it comes to DNS and breaking people and things like that, I think getting the scenarios out on paper is going to help us understand, okay, what the actual risk is, because sometimes it's, you think, oh, this is a breaking change. You write it down and say, okay, there's actually a very small probability of getting to that scenario. I don't know if that'll be the case here, but I think I want to see the different ways that are break written down first, and then be able to decide from there. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I guess I was trying to think of like I suspect. So basically, this doc just brought up the broader topic of the fact that Ambient is going to respect Kubernetes with respect to host names for cluster local being just local to the cluster, and using the cluster set host name to address the service mesh wide.
Gotcha.
So that's like us respecting Kubernetes is actually us breaking compatibility with Istio in a way. So there's kind of like that trade-off. So I feel like we need we need to figure out where to document this, and I suspect this isn't the only topic of breaking changes coming from either Kubernetes or Istio.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I agree with Costin. We should only try to break once. Yeah, it's difficult because I think everybody stands to gain if Istio is more aligned to Kubernetes, but yeah, breaking changes aren't great. So I mean, I need to think about that a little bit more, because I don't see how we just. I think we have to adopt MCS at some point, especially as Gam and everything move in that direction. But how we go about doing it and communicating it is up in the air. We try to be as clear as possible with that, whether that's via foundation or something else.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think Istio made a terrible decision early on to just hijack cluster local to be mesh wide. I mean, that was the original sin of Istio. So I think the adopting Kubernetes model is the right thing to do by default. Maybe we provide options to opt into the Istio way of doing things. I don't know, but even then you get into situations where, well, what if I'm putting together a mesh that is composed of partly an Istio system and partly Kubernetes. I don't know. I don't know if such a monstrosity would actually be something somebody would actually do in production. But I don't know. It's complicated. We've got that original sin of Istio that's kind of like the bane of this. Anyway, I think the question is, I think we all agree we need to document it. I think the question is like where and how to keep track of this it's probably something we should keep track of as a group and make some decisions about. Okay, so we've got this problem. What do we want to do about it in subsequent releases? Do we want to just let it be a continual breaking change for Istio, or provide some knobs to allow them to opt into that old Istio behavior, etc.
Well, and to add some more like context into this, so we've been talking about this aspect from Gamma for a while, and turns out Istio is not alone. Like there are other meshes who multi-cluster don't really do things the MCS way. And so, the idea of the clients being able to decide where the traffic is routed via DNS is one of the things that has led to MCS having not super widespread adoption across service meshes. It feels like that ship may have already sailed. It's MCS is currently alpha, but it's to the point where there's not a ton of incentive for folks to change it. But yeah, I don't love that aspect about it either. Technically, there is an option of trying to change MCS, but I don't know how successful we'd be.
But it's not about MCS. We may have other solutions, but the main point is cluster local should stay local. Otherwise, applications will break and we cannot. So how we represent cluster set or something else, that's probably up for debate, and implementation can have other solutions. But the critical thing is that you shall not break applications when you enable Ambient.
Well, I mean,
it's the opposite, right? Cluster local doesn't stay local today in Istio, right?
Yeah, but that's a problem. That breaks applications. So you have options to disable that for some applications that are broken.
But I think the question is like breaking whom, right? Like, so, if you're coming from Istio, it's a breaking change to move to Ambient, right?
I would say Kubernetes is bigger than Istio.
Yeah, but it's a question of breaking users.
There is no question that some users of Istio, when they move to Ambient, will need to make changes.
I mean, yeah. So if Ambient, if the solution is Ambient provides knobs to allow the Istio thing, I mean, to your point earlier, the requirement is to not break, right? And that means for both Istio users and Kubernetes users. So that means we're going to have knobs, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I wish MCS had knobs, but in lieu of that, Istio should have knobs, Ambient should have knobs.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going to end up. Anyway, we're over time. That's actually a separate discussion anyway. We should probably follow up on it at some point. Later, guys.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Adios. Bye.